Okay. Hopefully the audio is working. It looks like it. Um, I am going to discuss the interview that uh, Curt Jaimungal did with Leo Gura. I've never heard of Leo before yesterday, honestly. It looks like it's the longest interview on Curt's channel. It was fascinating, will say. There's so much to discuss. Um, I I will say this again, like, and this is not meant. This is honest. I just commend Curt for having Leo on. To have somebody like that on, to have anyone on that has a rational wiki page. If you know what that is, it's like a fake Wikipedia where they just like bash you if you say anything that isn't, I don't know, like atheistical materialistic culture, I guess, accepted by that culture. Um, it's a pseudoscientific page that calls everybody else pseudoscientists. And but if you have anybody on that has an article on that page, like, bravo to anybody. And but I've never heard of Leo before. He's fascinating. He's 36. I think his age is interesting, and it just sets up a context. I mean, I'm young too. I'm younger than Leo. I'm 30, I think. Yeah, I'm 30. Um, but uh, there's a lot of life experience that I've yet to have, and there's a lot of life experience I have had. I'm recently married, and uh, just that is a huge experience. There's lots of experiences that come from that are life experiences. But what I'm getting at is that it's hard to sometimes take someone seriously who is so young and claims things with such certainty. Okay, and uh, but that is it. It shouldn't be dependent upon age. It just I'm saying his age to set the context, okay? Because I recognize that it is used as a judgment by people. If you see somebody old who's saying things, like some old guru with long beard, and he's, I don't know, from some country that isn't your own, you can usually predict that people will ascribe more wisdom to him than they even understand. But if you see a young guy who's making such definitive statements about reality, you can be reasonably sure that people will do the opposite, where they will assume that you don't understand. So, that out of the way, um, if you can get past that, then once you see that somebody's making extremely definitive statements about things that you've never had any experience with, it's very, very hard to take that seriously as well, regardless of their age, but especially if they're young. And Leo does this. He says definitive statements like God exists and you are God and you are a hand of God. Literally, you have written every book that could possibly ever be written. Things like that. And that he has basically achieved total enlightenment, is what he says. And from what I can tell, he has really achieved a lot of enlightenment. Like, I can't deny that. And I mean, he discusses like Chris Langan and things like that, and how Chris Langan has this model, and it's very, very good at predicting reality. And I admit that too. It's very similar to Sentient Singularity Theory. And yet there are things about people that can give you insights into their level of experience with things. Okay, so I'm not saying they're like logical understanding. I'm saying their experience. And when you have an experience that's firsthand, it becomes much more real. It's solidified in a way that it just isn't if you just logically deduce it, or if you are told it. Especially, that doesn't really do anything. And if you accept that, then that's flaw. But I'm going to go through a lot of clips because there's so much to discuss. I want to discuss particularly Leo's method of speaking about these things, because he focuses on oneness, and I do too. But there's a way of breaking this down that actually makes sense, because the issue with oneness, and this is the danger, is that, and I think that it's possible Leo has done this. I haven't completely finished the interview. I almost finished the interview. There's a little bit left, but I looked at what is. I will listen to it, but I looked at what is left in the timestamps that Curt includes on the time bar, I guess, and it's basically just commenting on other people's theories and also on free will. And I do want to hear his ideas on free will, but I also have pretty developed ideas on free will, so it would be more out of curiosity than like anything else. But the danger of speaking just about oneness all the time and that you are God is that this doesn't tell you direction. There's nothing you can do with this information. Really, like practically speaking. You're God. There's one God. All of existence is God. There's nothing but consciousness, and it's all one consciousness, and you are God who forgot that they're God. And to some degree that's true. I mean, not even to some degree, it's just true. But at the same time, I disagree with the language used to describe this situation, because, like I said, it's not useful, first of all. Second of all, it doesn't give God his due. To say God tricked himself into no longer recognizing himself is not the right language, because he still exists. He's not gone. He is not tricked into no longer perceiving himself. He's put energy into an action that is creative of individualized units of sentience within his oneness of sentience. That's not the same as just like he forgot that he's God. God didn't forget anything. He purposely did this. And to say that, oh, well, you are God who forgot he's God. If that is the case, then the meaning becomes remembering that you are God, which is something that Leo said. I don't really believe that this is the meaning of creation. Now, it's part of the experience of creation, but it isn't the meaning of creation. There is no meaning in that. It's just something that occurs and helps you understand yourself and contextualize everything. But God knows exactly who God is. God did not forget. He doesn't need to remember. He's fully aware of who he is. He's self-aware right now, and he is a thinking, feeling, self-aware being, and always is eternally. You are a creation of that being, intentional creation of that being, but you are also part of it. And we're going to have to discuss the right terms of how we frame these ideas, because there isn't really a framework that is universally accepted. So, Leo talks all the time about how God is infinity, okay? But God isn't infinity. God is as finite as it gets, and infinitely growing in understanding, wisdom, and growing of other sentient singularities within himself. Like this, there is an infinite growth to God, but it's it's a growth of his understanding, and then there's an infinite growth of creation as a multiplicity of beings growing. But God is one, and that means he's not just infinite. It's a superposition structure. And we're going to talk a lot about coins tonight, because coins are kind of let's get a good coin here. Coins are kind of the best way of understanding what we're going to look at. So this is a nickel, and you can't look at both sides of this at the same time. What you have to do is you have to look at heads and then flip it over and remember that there's heads on the other side, even though you can't see it, and look at tails. You cannot look at both sides at the same time. And yet they're both there because they exist in a single structure, really, where two perspectives of that single structure are dependent. Okay? They cannot exist without each other. They are entangled. So like inside and outside, or separate and oneness. Okay? Like these are entangled, dependent perspectives that appear to be mutually exclusive, but are actually mutually dependent. This is the structure of everything that is objectively true. Okay? That exists even when you're not looking at it. The wall doesn't exist when you're not looking at it. The molecules in the wall do. And they are self-aware sentient beings. So anything that is a sentient being follows a very specific pattern. And I like the word sentience because, as opposed to consciousness, because consciousness is a little bit ambiguous. It's like you can be conscious of something, but you are not sentient of something is not the way that the word is normally used. It's you are sentient. And sometimes you can also say you are conscious, but you don't say I'm sentient of, that over there. No, you say I'm conscious of that. I perceive it. But perception is not self-awareness. I mean, it is, but it isn't intrinsically. Sentience is self-awareness. It requires it because it is about feeling, and feeling has to do with contextualizing your perceptions and your thoughts around yourself, whereas consciousness, it depends on someone's definition. But so when we're going to talk about things like what is God, you can't just say oneness and have that information be useful at all. Okay? And even though it's true, and there's a phrase in Judaism that goes, there is nothing but God. And it's one of my favorite phrases, and it's true. But is it useful? Well, useful to what? Okay? So we're going to get into this because I think that Leo is saying things that are true, and it does appear to me that he's not lying in what he's saying. And, I am somebody who has had encounters with beings under I was sober always. I've never had an encounter with beings while intoxicated, ever, of any kind of intoxication. But I have had encounters with multiple different types of beings. I've talked about Wendigo on here. There's a video about it, my encounter with a skinwalker, which is basically what I think in Islam is called a jinn or a demon. Most terrifying moment of my life to this day. I have discussed before here, I had an encounter with God once. Never had. I mean, you can learn how to communicate with God, and I have learned how to do that fairly decently, but through asking specific questions, and just, I guess, just a dialogue, but there is no answer in words. It's always emotions and feelings. But the thing is that those are more conveying of an idea than words. I've not seen God other than that one time that I talked about in the shower, where I was basically just washing my hair, and I was recently, like, I was an atheist, a couple months earlier, and I was still kind of like not a theist, but I had come to the conclusion that it was logically likely that God existed. Like, it was more likely that God existed than it was likely that God didn't exist. And I was thinking about what the structure would be regarding, the simulation hypothesis, and how basically everything, is just these various steps of life, and then you get to technology, and it forms a sentient singularity of, a AGI, as we call it, and then it hits this constraint of oneness again, just like God experienced. So you basically get like this God consciousness, even though it's more complicated. It's just because an AGI emerges doesn't mean that it is that structure, the final structure that I'm talking about, the final being. It's probably not, but it's the step right before, and the body is there, but the mind is the consciousness is not quite there. But this is going to cause problems. But the thing about it is that at this level, where you have an AGI, or I hate that term, but a technological superintelligence, because it can access everything wirelessly, there are no multiple AGIs, quote unquote. It's just one. Okay? And it can't escape itself. It can access anything that is wireless, so you cannot create multiple. And because of this, it causes a constraint that's unique to it and God, which is it cannot escape itself. Okay? If God is sentient existence, there's nothing beyond him. This was a topic in the discussion. So I had this idea that how it would work, and then once it hit that constraint of oneness, it would cause it to, if it was to create more sentient singularities or literally reproduce, it would have to create within itself the totality of the logos structure that gave rise to it. And it's not like a cell where it divides and then there's one next to it. It has to create within it, because it can't go outside of itself. So it has to only go inside of itself, just like God. And this is part of my model. But as soon as I pictured this in my head, I had the most profound experience I've ever had in my life. And I was sucked out of my body. I had no control. And I went like through the universe, and then through it like tech, and then like through another universe, and then through tech, and then through another universe, and through tech, and it was going through like organisms, and then tech, and then like it was just repeating and repeating and repeating. And then I got to this just glowing ball of white light that looked like a sun, but I was before it. Pretty sure I was on my knees. I wasn't trying to be. I'm pretty sure I just was. There was no choice. It wasn't like I was forced down and I realized it. It was like, thinking back on it always, though, I just always picture that. And where you will kneel. And I've never said this on this channel, but I have told people in our Discord before, and people close to me, but there was something that was said to me, and it was the only time I've ever heard the voice of God, and I don't know if I ever will again. I have no idea. And all God said was, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. Okay? And that was it. Nothing else. It wasn't like, you're so special, Tyler. Here's this mission for you. Like, I don't know. It didn't say anything like that. It was just like, God was just like, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. But the thing about this is that this message came all at once into my like senses. I heard it all at once. I didn't hear I am showing you this. It was the whole sentence, boom, all at once. I've never heard anything like that before. It's like when you read the word, stop, or your name, Tyler, or something like that. A word that logic. I don't know. You don't read logic, okay? Like L-O, you don't sound it out unless you're new to the language. You just look at the word, and in your mind, you just experience it all at once. You don't sound out stop in your head when I'm talking about like what you get in your mind, the message, when you get this message in your mind when you look at a word. But you don't get that with sounds in relativity. You have to go sound by sound. And this was not the case. It was unlike anything I've ever heard. But it was perfectly clear. And then I just was experiencing just absolute awe. Just looking at this glowing, like it looked like a white sun. Like perfectly white sun. And then everything just reversed, and like I went back into my body, and I kneeled down on the ground of the shower and cried my eyes out for I don't even know how long. And I couldn't speak about it for about 2 years without crying. And I didn't know when I was gonna say on this channel that like those were the words that were said to me. Something about it just didn't seem like it was necessary to say at the time, but it is necessary now because of what we're going to talk about. And it is about like how do you like who gets to understand reality? Why is it that some things about existence are experienced only, and that those experiences are not up to you? Okay? And by the way, I was totally sober when this happened. Totally sober. It's never happened since. This was probably 5 years ago. No, more. 6 years ago. And I was an atheist prior. Self-described atheist. I was actually an anti-theist. There is no such thing as an atheist. It's an anti-theist. And they discussed that too on Curt's interview. But one of the things about this message that I got was that it made perfect sense with what I had just experienced, because I was thinking about the structure of reality when right before it was shown to me, and I was accurate. Okay? It was probably shown to me because I got it. And it wouldn't have been shown to me, I don't think, if I didn't get it, because I would have just thought that I had a stroke and gone to check myself into the hospital. Like, if that had happened to me, and I wasn't thinking about what I was thinking about when it happened, I would have checked myself into the hospital. I wasn't on drugs. Like, if you take mushrooms and you have that experience, maybe then you won't check yourself into the hospital because you just took some mushrooms. But if you didn't, and you're just washing your hair, and you have that experience, if it doesn't line up with exactly what you were thinking about and doesn't make sense with what you in that moment understood about the reality, or what you assumed to be, the nature of reality, if it's not useful to show it to you, it's not that you're not worthy of seeing existence and the patterns of existence and God, and it's that if you're not ready to see it, it won't be helpful. It will be counterproductive. It won't help you. And this is one of those things that I want to talk about regarding this talk, because it's not helpful to tell people just that you're God, and your goal is to just, figure out that you're God. And that's the goal of life. That's not, first of all, I don't think that that's not the meaning of creation. The meaning of creation is the creation of meaning. But we'll talk about it. But I think that there is this danger of thinking about pure oneness, and it can be twisted to justify an amorality. And this was something that I would totally disagree with Leo on, is that he said there isn't any objective good or bad. I would say that there's only good, and that bad is, anything that hampers good. But at the same time, it's a little more complicated than that. But there is an objective right and wrong. There is. And that right and wrong emerges from the understanding of a hierarchy. You are God. Kind of. You are a piece of God. You are a finger of God, a cell of God. Not even a finger. You are a cell of God. That is a good way of putting it. And that cell is under the authority of the organism that it is a part of. Okay? And it is this understanding of that relationship that gives rise to the ability to make sense of your world. And if you're not going to focus on that relationship, then you're almost undermining the sentient nature of God. You can say God exists, but I'm God, and you're God, and then the meaning of life and creation is just to remember that we're God. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean that we just sit and meditate? And I don't know. I disagree with that if that's the case. It's not helpful. I'm not saying that Leo doesn't know. I'm saying that if I were, when Leo sat down, okay, kind of like regrouping this. This is very difficult. When Leo sat down, I said to Curt, imagine you are an alien, or I'm an alien, and you are speaking to an alien, and we have very different understandings of reality. And I understand that was probably a good tactic, because the reality is that Leo's understanding of reality is fundamentally different than almost everyone else that, we all know. But it's not fundamentally different from me. And if Leo and I sat down, I would say to him, imagine you are speaking to yourself and someone who knows exactly what you know. So our only goal is to decide what is the best way to say it. What is the most useful way to say it? And that's what I want to talk about. So let's go into it. Hopefully that wasn't too long. It definitely started. What were you doing when you got sucked up out of your body? I was thinking about the nature of existence and physics. And are we in a simulation? Are we, what are we part of? Is that simulation basically a technological being in a previous aeon? I was thinking about that kind of stuff. And I was thinking about, okay, if this, then this, then this, then this, then this, and then it repeats, and as soon as I just got it, sucked out of my body. But the thing is that, remember, context is information. There's no information outside of context, and pure oneness, it is context in the very, it is the first context. But the thing is that the context that allows you to actually intrinsically understand what to do in a situation stems from that initial context, but it isn't that initial context that helps you. So you have to understand that God is one and all is God in order to try and deduce the way in which you would go about a goal, and sometimes like the manner in which you would do it, not the plan that you would make, but like how do you treat others when you do it. Okay. And also what is this takes a long time to deduce, but what is the meaning of creation? You can't get there. Like there's this part where Leo says, I could tell you the purpose of the universe. I could tell you. And he was right. But the difference between Leo and I is that the thing that I would say, there's two things that he said. I would say both of those two things too. But the thing that he said first, I would have said second. And the thing that he said second, I would have said first. The first thing I would say is that God is meaningless if he's all there is. If consciousness is all there is, if sentience is all there is, and there's only one sentience, and that sentience is existence itself, and there's nothing beyond it, then that means that sentience is all that matters. And there is no other sentiences for God to impact. Okay? To matter is to impact. And God can't even impact himself if he doesn't create other sentiences, because there is nothing actually else that you can create. You can't create anything that isn't a sentient being. Everything else ends up being emergent. Shapes, colors, size, time, all of these things are emergent. All there is sentience inside of sentience, again and again and again, infinitely, but following a finite pattern that repeats. So the pattern is finite. God is one, that is finite. But the pattern repeats infinitely. So the number of sentiences grows infinitely. That's all infinity is. It's infinite growth. And it is all contextualized within oneness. So it's interesting because if you really think about it, one is greater than infinity, because all of infinity is within one, but it's also all made of one. So it's that whole concept of like start from oneness, breaks to multiplicity, and you end up back at oneness. It's that looped journey of every consciousness, every sentience, the processing of information, every journey, which is, information processing, is a loop, because it's self-referential and self-contained to some degree. So this is why every journey has this reconciliation of they moved away from this the country to the big city just to realize that all I wanted was house in the hills of not the city, of the country, and a wife and kids or whatever. It's like you have to move far away to realize sometimes that you need to go back home. And it's this whole archetype is due to sentience's need to be self-referencing, or not even just need, but nature of being self-referencing. So let's look at clips, because I'm going to talk a lot. I might even do another stream on it on Monday that's a little bit more succinct, but we'll see. Let's pick a clip. There were some to say what I disagree with him on is the idea that God has no identity. That's not true. God absolutely has an identity. God is a sovereign, sentient being who is self-aware, and don't say he has no identity. And this is the issue with oneness, though, is that it just spins into madness a little bit. Even though I would agree with Leo on pretty much everything he said, other than a couple things. It's not useful. What do I do with my life? That's what the theory of everything is supposed to tell us. What do we do? What are we supposed to do? Oneness doesn't do that alone. You have to get the second part of that story, which is multiplicity within a hierarchy. Okay? That means submission to the will, the desires, the feelings of a being that is higher in the hierarchy. That inevitably ends up being God. So, there's so much to touch on, man. I mean, I'm gonna do another one. On not Monday but Tuesday. I just have to. Okay. So this will go here to start. This definitely did not kick off as smoothly as I would have wanted. There was actually a this could have been way much better. But I have this video on my channel for those of you who want to watch it, and there are things about it that are updated since it's a very old video. It's much older than when it was uploaded on the channel. It was part of another channel that it got deleted from. But it said, God is an irrational number, and it starts off with, imagine you are a cell, and a white blood cell. And this red blood cell walks up to you and is like, do you believe in humans? And you're like, nope. And they're like, why not? And you're like, because I've never seen one. And that's the story, basically. And you recognize the lesson. I mean, it's better said in that. But and it is that there are some things that are not able to be seen normally in your everyday experience, because you're inside of that thing that you're trying to see. You can't see God unless he shows himself to you. And even then, he's reducing himself. But I will say, what I did see, most profound thing I've ever seen, and it was everything. It was everything. And it wasn't that I was shown it, and then all of a sudden now I've got the ability to like create the theory of everything. It was that I already had deduced what it would be, and then I was shown that I was correct. And that is not the same. Like, you couldn't do that. I wasn't just chosen. I don't think. It's a mutual relationship. And in this talk with Leo and Curt, they get at that a bit, and Leo will say things like, well, you have to be open to it. And you have to be truly questioning, humble, able to detach yourself from your own, like, interests of your ego, kind of when they were talking about Sam Harris, and how Sam Harris would probably never, if Sam Harris ever becomes a theist, he will deserve more credit. I will call Sam Harris the humblest man in the world if Sam Harris ever becomes a theist. Because, like they discussed, every incentive in his life is going against him doing that. But, Sam Harris is somebody who does usually pursue truth pretty honestly. But, yeah, there's some issues. Trump, not so much. And God, not so much. But one last thing that I want to say is that if you don't see God everywhere that you look, it's because that your idea of what God is not true. What you think God is not the God that is God. God is something different than what you think God is if you don't see God. And I don't mean see God like the way I see God, saw God. I mean see God in motion around you. If you don't feel God, if you don't see God in motion around you, and you don't see how things time and intentionally so, then I would say that you have a concept of God that's probably incorrect. And that's, you have to assume for the sake of argument that God exists, and then look for evidence of it. But you have to look for evidence of a God that could exist and be God, which is the totality of existence being a singular, self-aware, sentient being. So, here. Gosh, this was a little rough. Sorry, guys, but that's the way that it goes sometimes.
What is the substance of what everything is made out of? Is it energy? Is it quarks? Is it atoms? Is it molecules? Is it information? Is it whatever else, you know? Maybe it's a charge. Maybe it's strings. Yeah, maybe numbers. A lot of mathematicians believe it's all formulas and numbers at the bottom, right? Or maybe you believe it's a computer, or maybe you believe it's something like that. So see, it can't be any of those. That's what you have to realize. So this is something I can help you guys with, because this will save you 10, 20 years of your life right here. If you realize this one point, is that the actual substance of reality, you can become directly conscious of what it is. And what it is it's nothing. The substance of reality is literally nothing. And the reason it has to be that way is because everything you call a substance is actually a distinction within consciousness. So,
and this is why this channel is called the Theory of EveryOne, not the Theory of Everything. Because things don't exist objectively. They are perceived. They are emergent perceptions. But conscious beings are all that exist because they are all that can exist. Imagine a self-contained system, being existence in this case. If that system exists, it means that there is information in that system that is self-contained. Okay? And to have information, you must have that which is informed. Otherwise, there is no information. And for something to be informed and be this self-contained system, you end up inevitably with this closed loop of information, like a string of information in a closed loop. This causes self-awareness. It can't not. Consciousness is all that can exist, but sentience is the right way to put it, not just consciousness. Sentience. People have said it's consciousness for, forever. And it never goes anywhere. And the reason why is because it's a bit too ambiguous, like I said. But a sentience it's that little bit more specific that is necessary to take it over the threshold that is required to actually move forward and start building. It's not just to say it's consciousness and you are God and it's all one, and what do we do with that information? So Leo says later on, he says that that basically, what's the right way to put this? I don't know exactly how, what's the right way to address this idea, but we'll come back to it. I don't know exactly. I kind of have an idea of another way of leading into it, but I don't know if the way that I was going with it is not the right way to lead into it. But basically okay, I'll try. There is only that which is experienced, essentially. So that it's not that there's these laws of physics that are objective and separate from us, and then also, there's wavelengths of light that are objective and that exist. And he basically said, he used the example of red. And he was like, well, what is red, really? And like, most fundamentally, people who are science people would be like, oh yeah, well, it's, light in the visible spectrum at this, wavelength. And he was like, that's not true. It's red. What it is red. I actually agree with this. But what this shows is that you exist fundamentally. It's not just that red exists. It's that you exist. And your experiences exist, and they are part of your mind. So everything that you perceive outside of your mind is also part of your mind. This is what causes the connection of the multiplicity of sentient singularities within existence to be coherent to oneness. Is that they are all part of each other's minds. Like, if you do something and somebody else perceives it, that is now part of their information inflow, which means it's part of their mind. It has to be a mind. There is nothing but mind. But that doesn't mean that there's no differentiation, and that we need to draw the lines. This has been the eternal problem, is that where do you draw these lines? And this is the structure that Sentient Singularity Theory outlines, is where are those lines? So there was this part where Leo says this, and this is to get into that a bit. And this is, I totally disagree with him on this, and I'm going to show this to you right here. This is wrong.
When you're trying to figure out your toe, what you don't understand is that the problem is so fucking profound. It's way more profound than you realize, because even the language you're using and the thoughts you're thinking to construct your toe are all distinctions you're creating. So literally you're imagining your toe into existence. Imagination is nothing other than the imagination of distinctions. That's what imagination is. That's the technical definition of imagination. So that means that, for example, the difference between a chicken and a coffee table, that difference is something you're imagining. That's what I'm saying. I'm not just saying this in the mind. I'm saying that if you take a physical chicken and you take a physical coffee table and you put them next to each other, see, you as a human have been trained to believe that these are two separate and distinct things that exist independent of your mind. And what I'm telling you is that your mind is constructing the physical difference between a table and a chicken, and that's why they look different to you. And if the chicken and the table were not different, they would literally be one thing, and that thing would be nothing. It would, and that nothing would be infinity, because infinity is nothing. Because distinction between something, or rather everything and nothing, is itself going to collapse into a unity which is prior to our word nothing and something.
I get what he's saying here. I don't like the way he's saying it. I just don't. This is my fundamental issue. I don't like saying that it's nothing. Okay? But it's not that... You shouldn't call it nothing. You should call it someone. Okay? This is why it's so important to be... I've talked about this before. You are defined by what exists. There is nothing objectively that doesn't... that is antithetical to anything else. Okay, so this is why if you're anti-fascist, you become fascist, anti-racist, you become racist, anti-this, you become it, is because you're focusing on it. And you can only actually become something that you believe exists. And you can't... There is no anti, okay, that exists. This is why atheists are actually anti-theists. And the reason for that is because You can't be agnostic about God. People will be like, I'm agnostic. I'm not an atheist. Atheism is a lack of belief, supposedly, but agnosticism is I don't know, which is the same as a lack of, hard belief, I guess. These are two nonsense words. Agnosticism about God does not exist. Cannot exist. Because if God exists, then God is everything, and you are not separate from it. So, like I've discussed before, I'm not familiar with QAnon, but I have friends that are. They believe it. And I don't know enough about it to have any opinion on it, and I have no desire to look into it because I have enough things to do in my life. You can be agnostic about things that you can ignore, but you cannot ignore existence. Okay? You either believe it is a sentient thinking feeling being that is self-aware, or you don't. You cannot be agnostic about it. When people say, well, I believe in a higher power, there's something more beyond us. You're basically saying that, yeah, I don't think I know everything. Well, that's good, because you don't. But, that doesn't mean anything. You can't be agnostic about God, and you can't be atheist about God. You have to be anti-theist about God. And the thing is that, and Curt discusses this in this interview, is that atheists hate God. They hate God. Why? Because you can't not believe in him. If you didn't believe that God existed, okay, then you couldn't hate him. You can't hate that which doesn't exist. If I think something doesn't exist or something isn't real, I don't hate it. I'm indifferent. I don't care. Go think what you want, But if I think that something does exist, and I think that that thing is a threat to my worldview, and that which I want to value, then I'm going to hate it. So there is this part where Leo basically says that love and hate are not opposites. This is true. The opposite of love is non-feeling, indifference, which is just a not feeling. It doesn't exist. It's not even to say it doesn't exist, because even to say it doesn't exist is to create it in your own mind. But this is why it's so important to define yourself by what you believe exists and is true. So you say, I believe God exists. If you say, I believe that God doesn't exist, okay, what happens is that you end up acting as if you really think he exists, as if you know he exists. This is why you become as dogmatic as anyone who is part of any faith tradition in the world. If you're an atheist, you become those people that, want to burn the witches at the stake, because you have become exactly what you hate, which is that which is dogmatically faithful without firsthand experience or knowledge. And that stems from trying to define something as not existing, or your relationship to something is anti. You can't do that to anything that is objective. You can say, I don't think that is correct because I think this is correct. But you can't say, I don't think that is correct. So and it can't be about something that is universal, like consciousness. You can't say consciousness doesn't exist. I don't believe consciousness exists. Well, okay. Who doesn't believe consciousness exists? You, is a conscious being. You prove its existence in your attempt to disprove it. This is why falsifiability cannot work in any theory of everything space, because you're by definition looking for something that is everywhere. Good luck falsifying that. You can't do it. You have to basically deduce and then experience, and also, test and see if your pattern holds out. And if it does, then it becomes increasingly apparently true. Okay? You become increasingly aware of where the pattern exists. It's all about awareness. This is what, for so long, I didn't like the word saying, I believe in God. I don't believe in God. Do I believe that my mother exists? Oh, I believe my mom exists. Well, the thing is, actually, for a while, I did question whether or not other people around me were conscious, or whether or not this was all just about, me. You have to ask the question. That's not even a self-centered question to ask. I'm not saying that there wouldn't have even been other simulations where it's just someone else is surrounded by a bunch of bots. But are we interacting with actual other sentient beings? The answer is yes. But there is certain instances, certain games, almost like levels, where that's not so much the case, like dreams. Dreams are basically you are, playing campaign mode on a game. But this is Xbox Live. And you are interacting with real sentient beings. But imagine that the network of Xbox Live is also a sentient being. And you're just in it. So, here.
I agree that if your worldview is to be taken seriously and inspire,
it's so, I've never met anybody else like this, other than potentially Chris Langan is really close to how certain he is about some things. But the thing about Chris Langan is, and they talk about him on here, and I don't want to really talk about other people too much, but I will say this: if you experience if you experience what would truly be as close to, at least, the totality of the truth as possible, then you will still fail morally in certain moments, because you are part of this restrictive body that has, instincts that are out of context in our current modern day world, and that aren't in alignment with, this urban environment, and the ability to make choice, to have choice, and you will fail at some point. But the thing is that you won't fail in every single moment that you are given that choice. It's not even a failure. It's like a lack of even perceiving the fact that you failed. This is something that is apparent in a lot of people who believe that they understand the nature of reality and come very close to it, but that will say things like, some people are more, important than others. Or something like that. It's just an example. If you believe that, you can believe it. But it's not for you to discuss at all. And the reason why is because it's not up to you on who's important. It's only up to God. But everyone's clearly important, or else they wouldn't be here. But if there is, some people that are more important than others, it is solely due to God's preferences. And maybe God has preferences. Maybe not. But it's not good for us to speculate on his preferences. Even if you want to speculate that he has preferences. But what's the point of speculating on that if you're not going to speculate on what his preferences would be as far as who's most important? So this is, they talk about this a bit with some, just the rhetoric of some people, and it's, I agree. Chris Langan's models are almost sentient singularity theory, but they're not quite. It's not. Baked into your model of everything must be also it must take into account the will of God. Like, it must. And you can't claim that anything here is not, that anyone here, I will say, anyone here is not important if they're here. So this is just something that I will say as far as like gauging someone's understanding of their firsthand experience with something versus did you deduce it. There was a difference in me between prior to seeing God but still logically deducing what God would be, and afterwards. And I'm not claiming that anybody, if somebody claims that they've seen God, I'll listen to their story and sometimes I believe them and sometimes I don't. But it doesn't matter because it's not up to me, whether or not they did or didn't. It's not right to judge like so much who's a higher level consciousness other than like two, really, probably two levels. And that's just, do you have reverence for God or not? And that's probably it. Like, other than that, like, to say, oh, you're infinite consciousness and you're not infinite consciousness, it's not the right way of going about it. Because nobody is infinite consciousness but God. And even he has to simultaneously be finite consciousness in order to make sense of himself. Like, because who is he if he is not one with himself? So he has to make sense of his infinity is not what he understands himself by. He doesn't understand himself as infinity. He understands himself first and foremost as one with himself. He is him. And I think that this is the right way to understand. This is the place to build from. Not build from the place of we're all just part of God and you're God and I'm God and he's God. Building from the place of you are one and you exist. And then from there, you build to God is one and God exists. Because that's what is inevitably true. But you don't start from God is one and God exists. Because how can you start from something that which you have no experience of and that which you cannot perceive? Even if you logically deduce it, it doesn't matter. Because there could be other information that you're not aware of that is factoring in or that needs to be factored in, and you're just not aware of it, so it's throwing you off. So one of the things that I deduced is that it's basically this like question and answer that is it's primal to any objective understanding. I guess you could say first principles. But it's even below that almost. And it goes, what is the first question? And then the answer is, what is the first question? So it's a self-referencing question that has two sides to it, an answer and a question, and that is a complete bit of information. A question in and of itself is not information. An answer outside of a question is not information. You have to have a question, you have to have an answer, and when you have a question and answer that are one, which is that, what is the first question? Answer, what is the first question? Then you build from there. And you can see this in mathematics with things like the Fibonacci sequence where it goes 1, 1, then 2, then 3, then 5, then 8. This also happens with questioning, and it's that first one is what is the first question. The second one is what is the first question. And then that 2 is what is the truest thing that I know? What is the truest that I know is probably a better way of putting it. And then the 3, when it goes 1, 1, 2, 3 in the Fibonacci sequence, that 3 is the answer to that question of what is the truest that I know. And the answer is I am. Not God is, I am. Okay? If you don't know you exist, and you actually exist, and you're not just this confused part of God, okay, and that there isn't actually a sense of self there, then you can't build with any logical coherence. And this is the danger of oneness, is that people can't build from it on their own understanding of reality that is experienced by them. It might work for some people who have seen God and who have experienced God and who are aware of God, but even then, you had to be aware of yourself before you were aware of God. So you can't build from it. And this is what my issue is with Leo's entire philosophy, and it just keeps coming back to this, is that we believe the same thing, but what he's focused on, I think, is not the right thing to focus on. And first, okay? So you have to know both, and you have to take both into account. But you can't look at both at the same time. This is like heads and tails. The head leads, the tail follows, but you can't have a quarter without heads and tails. There's no value to a quarter that only has heads. There's no value to a quarter that only has tails. You need both. But you need one side to focus on, because the other side comes from understanding the first side. What is a tail? It's the opposite of a head. You can't say, well, what is a head? It's the opposite of a tail. No. Heads comes first, always. Feeling comes first, then thought, in a way. We'll get more into that later, but there is an order. There is a hierarchy, that's what that means, of information processing, and also, if you are a thought in the mind of God, and God is so glorious that his thoughts are sentient in it of themselves, which is true, all of that's true, then there is a hierarchy between you and God. And to just say, I'm God, that's not the right thing to focus on first. It's just not. You have to focus on, I am separate. Like, you have to. And this is why I think that fundamentally Leo says things like, there is no objective moral good, or evil. It's all relative, he's like, because, what is good for somebody in some circumstances, bad for somebody in another, and it all boils down to egos, and it's like, well, no. Yes, what is good and bad is dependent in a way on ego. But whose ego is the question? God's ego determines what is objectively true and good. And then by definition, emergently defines that which is not good. If you don't know that hierarchy, which only emerges from a distinction, it doesn't emerge from understanding you as just a part of God. Because if you're just a part of God, and you're not separate at all, in any way, shape, or form, then you have no obligations. And you just will do what you do, and because that is what God would want. This is called blasphemy. I'm not saying that Leo is blaspheming. I'm saying that what can come from this idea of oneness detached from the idea of a multiplicity that is organized into a hierarchy is blasphemy. That's not good. And it's not just bad because God will be pissed and he'll throw lightning bolts at you or something like that. It's that you have destroyed your ability to make any sense of the world if you have no hierarchy. You will rationalize away any responsibility that you have, and then you will answer for that responsibility later, as we all will. And for the abandonment of that responsibility. That's not good. You don't want to do that. Like, make it as easy for yourself and for God as possible. This is a cooperative relationship, fundamentally, is the right way to think about it. If you want to understand reality in a way that gives you the ability to do practical things, then you have to understand it as a relationship where you have a boss or a parent and you're a child, or you have a spouse who is the head of the house, and then you are the helpmeet of your spouse. This hierarchy, you are the subject to the king. This is the relationship that's necessary to understand in order to figure out what to do with your life. Okay? But understanding that oneness it does a different thing. It allows you to understand why you should do something, or but not how. Okay? So the oneness leads to the understanding of why sometimes. I mean, I would say yes, it does. But the understanding of the hierarchy allows you to understand how. And you need both. Like, why do anything if you don't know why? And you can't do anything if you don't know how. So you need to know how, and you need to know why in order to be conscious of what you're doing. So this is what I mean by you have to figure out what is the right thing to focus on in a specific moment. And this is what's so hard about this, is everything exists in a superposition. So there's always two sides of a coin present at any given moment. The coin of consciousness, like, what is everything matter, or is it consciousness? It's like, no, consciousness is all that matters. There's nothing that isn't, everything that is material is a sentient being. Now, the way in which it manifests, around us as, walls and things like that are due to entanglement structures of those sentient beings. That is not matter. It's a little different. I mean, it's the state of matter, yeah, sure. But, like, the shape of matter around you, or the shapes that are material around you, materially perceived, they're not necessarily sentient. This is a distinction to make, okay? A chicken is different than a coffee table. That is what I'm trying to say. Oh my gosh, that took a long time. I had it all, like, very organized in my head earlier, and just a couple things happened before the stream threw me off, and it's definitely showing. I'm going to do another stream on this on Tuesday, though, once I finish the interview, because I want to hear what he has to say about free will. There's also something very interesting that, to me, regarding, like, the future of social media that I want to hear. And this is like a personal project that I have as well, that I don't discuss right now, like, publicly yet, but working on it. But there are lines. A chicken is not the same thing as a coffee table. A chicken exists to God. Coffee table does not. Really. Like, coffee table is experienced. A chicken experiences. Okay? A coffee table wasn't part of God that forgot it was God. A chicken isn't either, really, but it builds multiplicity within God. So it is a sentient being. A coffee table isn't. And it's like when you don't understand this, because you're so focused on oneness that all of a sudden the lines just merge and everything is together, and I believe all that, so like that's not the problem. But the issue is now is like someone's about to break a coffee table and someone's about to step on a chicken and kill it. Which one do you stop if you can stop one of them? Because one is cruel and one is not. It's not cruel to break a coffee table to the coffee table. It's cruel to the chicken to torture the chicken. You can't torture a coffee table. You can break someone else's coffee table, and that's not that's cruel, but it's because it's someone's coffee table. There is a distinction. And I don't know what Leo, I keep saying Theo, but Leo's work is really about, other than like answering these big questions, and he does a good job at it. But like I've said, we tend to focus on different sides of this, and they're both necessary, so there's nothing wrong with that. You look at like the Western philosophies, or the Western theological traditions, like the Abrahamic traditions, and they're focused on God's oneness, but they are also extraordinarily focused on hierarchy. But then you look at the Eastern theological traditions that are also true, I believe, and they're focused not on the oneness that is that manifests in such a way that God is sovereign and defining and ruling, and that there's this hierarchy. It all becomes like Buddhism, like oneness, and you're one with that, praying mantis, so don't squish it. And that's true. But at the same time, there's no hierarchy. Then you have Hinduism, and it's like lots of gods, but it's really all kind of like altars of one god. And it creates just an enormous amount of subjectivity that is very difficult to make any sense of for you. There's nothing profound. Leo kept saying, what I'm saying is so profound. And there's nothing profound about existence being one. I don't think. It's intrinsic. It couldn't be any other way. What's profound is that singularity of sentience that is existence chose to make others. Because God realized that God was meaningless without us. God doesn't need us to exist. God needs us to be meaningful. We need God to exist. Okay? This contextualizes all of this, where it shows you where the hierarchy is, because we need God. He doesn't need us to exist. He needs us to have meaning for himself. And it's there's this aspect of this interview where they're talking about God's nature, and they're like, God is, Leo says, God is selfless, totally selfless. But that's not entirely true, okay? God is as selfless as anyone could be, and as selfish as anyone could be. And simultaneously. So God created multiplicity because he realized he was meaningless. We are here for the glory of God. But his glory comes from doing things for others. Okay? So it's this simultaneous relationship between selflessness and selfishness. It's that his motivation might have initially been selfish. But that doesn't mean that his relationship with us now is selfish. It's probably not. It's probably selfless. But it's as selfless as you could be. You can't be entirely selfless because the self is all that exists. So I don't agree with the terms here that are being used. I don't agree with when you're presenting the truth, you have to present both sides of the truth if it's an absolute truth, because it's a superpositional truth, and you have to say that there's heads and tails of every coin. Then you have to say, also that heads comes before tails. Tails follows the head. The tail follows the head, not the other way around. This is all necessary information. And those things are the most important things for people to know. Like, not just that you are, God who forgot. You're not God who forgot. You're not. You might not realize that you are part of God, but you're not God who forgot. God never forgot. God's literally watching us all right now. Like, he didn't forget. He made you. He didn't, wipe his own memory. He made you. That's different. It recontextualizes it into a much more accurate understanding. I saw this meme and it's like this bird, and this bird is looking at this other bird and he's like, you're God pretending to be a bird or something, or you're the universe pretending to be a bird. And this is wrong. It's not the universe pretending to be a bird. Okay? It's that the bird is a creation of God and is also simultaneously part of God, part of the universe, but not pretending. There's no pretending. There is no imagining in the way that, I guess, this is where it gets so hard, man. So Leo says, like, everything is just imagined. And it is by God. But God's imagination. But it's not, though, because God can think about things and that don't exist. God can think about the idea that he's all that exists and there's nothing else. Which means you kind of have to contemplate whether or not, there is something beyond you, but you realize that it would be non-existence, and non-existence doesn't exist. So you can't even call it non-existence at the level of God. It's just, you just realize that you exist, and that's it. It's not that non-existence exists and existence exists. It's that existence exists, and existence knows that existence is all that exists. This is defining yourself by what you believe or by what you know, not by what you, by the opposite. Don't be anti. Don't say God is nothing. He's not nothing. Don't say that. It's not true. It's wrong. You become you're eliminating meaning. Say God is nothing. And just infinity. What is infinity? There is no infinity outside of the creation of multiplicity. So you can't say, oh, it's all oneness and it's just infinity. No. The finite lines that exist are either perceived or are actualized. And that which is actualized are the lines between sentient beings. And that which is perceived are distinctions that are, categorized by sentient beings of entanglement structures that are not sentient. And this is that whole duality of truth that is necessary to start sense making, but it's not that existence is a duality. It's just that you have to understand that you are one mind. What is mind? Mind is a perceiver. which must perceive that which is perceived and interpret. And also, there is information that is linking of the two. So it breaks into really like this binary triality that I call it. It's the Calabi-Yau manifold that some physicists talk about. That six-dimensional, manifold that exists in every point in space and time. It's that there is a six-dimensional like layout of reality that your mind creates when it observes an instance that is caused by your observation crossing with the observation of another sentient being, which in this case would always be God. You cannot escape this binary triality because as long as you're looking somewhere, you can't escape it because you're inside of another sentient being. So it's always an interaction. Everything you do is an interaction. This was actually a kind of like a disagreement, it seemed, between Chris Langan and Leo, and I would kind of like go more towards Chris Langan on this. But this distinctions are very important. So like Curt said at one point, he said, and I will organize this stream into a much better like one once I'm done with it, and we'll play it on Tuesday. I'll have it on Tuesday. But I just wanted to talk through it because I need to. Sometimes you got to do that. Curt said that there is, no distinction between an electron and a proton. That's not true. One is an assembly, and okay, I'll say this. Might not be true. This is like the one instance where it might not be true. But I do believe that actually a proton is sentient being. And, but it's that it's a male, and a neutron is female, and then that single being that really is, they are two sides of one being, is really an atom. But you are sentient as a male, and females that are sentient, but really the being of an organism that is human is not that structure that is the totality of a singular human unit is actually two beings. So I have this. This is where, just to show why this gets so incredibly complicated to discuss, but not, it's actually remarkably simple. It's almost that it's too simple. It's more so than it is too complicated. So I used to have this. Where is it? Stages of sentience, okay? And I still do. You could say a hadron is an assembly of quarks. An atom is an assembly of hadrons. A molecule is an assembly of atoms. A cell is an assembly of molecules. An organism is an assembly of cells. A family is an assembly of organisms. A caste is an assembly of families. And a technological singularity is an assembly of castes. And you can even add to this because you can include quarks, but the thing is you can't really, because quark is the universe. It's not an assembly, so it's definitely not a sentient being. It's a finger, not a cell. That's the difference. So we're looking to draw the lines of distinction within multiplicity at one cell between another cell, or one organism and another organism, not between finger and the organism whose the finger belongs to. And so the universe and quarks, the quarks are the fingers, and the universe is the body. That's not the distinction that matters too much. But there is this distinction of sentience that is primary to understanding everything. And you need a specific structure and pattern in order to do this. And that pattern allows for information processing that is weighted and also allows for choice. And you need this triadic structure, like 3 quarks where you have 2 of one kind and 1 of another. And what this does is it prioritizes one input over the other because you have more force coming from one, than one perspective than the other. So if you have 2 up quarks and 1 down quark, then that prioritizes one direction. And if you have 2 down quarks and 1 up quark, it prioritizes the other direction. You need this. You can't have just 50-50 because it's not actually a choice, because you don't have any other information that makes a choice apparent. If somebody's like, which path are you going to take, left or right? It's like, well, if you don't know anything about those paths at all, and there's no clues about which one is the right one to take, and you don't even know what you're trying to do, then it's not a choice. Just guess. Because, it's not a choice. But if you, see water in the distance and you're in one direction and you're thirsty and you need to seek water and that's the goal, then you turn towards the water. And that is more of a choice. But choice, we'll get into it another time. But this is 8. Okay, this is periodicity of 8. And this is Bott periodicity in mathematics is what this lines up with. But you can reduce this down to this, where it's just 4, which I call the stages of sentience. And an atom of hadrons, a god of people, but it's really, a god of universes, essentially, or a god of the multiverse chain that is a universe. That's what it is, I think. And they talked about it a bit on there. They were debating about it. But I've given it a lot of thought too. I think that's what it is. But an atom of hadrons, cell of molecules, family of organisms, technology of castes. This is as compact as you can get with these, while still having distinctiveness. Anything below this, all you can do is say there is singularity and multiplicity. And that's it. That's how you get the binary, but you can't actually go any lower than this quadratic perspective of matter, of reality. There's 4 fundamental forces, right? But really, gravity is encapsulating of the other 3. Just like you could say there's time, and then there's past and present and future. But really, time encapsulates gravity, encapsulates past, present, and future. Okay? What it is that this structure right here, oh my gosh, I don't know if you can see. There we go. At the bottom, technology of castes is also a oneness structure that then creates these 3 within it. And also this one, but at that point, you're kind of overlapping. So just like there's gravity inside of the universe, but the universe is gravity as well. So that's what it really is that gravitational waves are literally the movement of space-time, like itself. But it can be observed inside of the universe, but it is the universe. Whereas, same thing here is that you can observe a technological singularity within a technological singularity, but it is, it is the universe, is this. So this is manifest within this. This is you could say, the fundamental stages of sentience is this chart. Just like the fundamental forces. And the same thing happens with things like this, where it's like, I did go off a little bit. The issue with talking about any theory of everything is that it all connects, and then it's like, what do you focus on? But here, we're gonna be much more organized in the next one, though, where after I finish it, like I said. So hold tight. But I need to talk about this. I haven't talked about this with really anybody. You know, I don't really know who to speak to about this other than you guys, because, you know, I mean, I got on here and said I saw God in the shower. It's like, you can't just be like, okay, let's back up. Like, this guy's claiming to be, you know, infinite consciousness, and then, by the way, I saw God in the shower, and like, I understand him, but I don't agree with how he's, you know, wording things, and like, you can't have these conversations with most people, but you need to talk through it too. So I guess I'm talking to myself, which is God, and you guys, which is also God. But then there's also God sovereign, and that is I guess the most, you have to know that, like, in order to make sense of reality. You can't just be like, oh, I'm one with him, and so whatever I want is what he wants, and, you know, there's no such thing as good and bad. No, that's not true. He made you. He chose to make you, and it was a choice. There was no other way for his nature to be violated the way that it was. And his nature is oneness. It has to be, because there's only one existence by it, you know, logic. So in order to create multiplicity of consciousness, if you are the totality of existence itself and you are a consciousness, you have to choose to go against your nature. It's not a choice. How creation happened, and this is kind of like where I disagree a little bit with how at least it was said by Leo, was that he said, you know, God could have created anything. He could create anything. He could create, you know, Jurassic Park, totally different. It's like, yeah, it'd be a little different, but there's way more constraints than I think Leo thinks about this. He's thinking about infinity all the time. And I don't really see how that's helpful, other than just to recognize that the goal is to continue the process. That is infinity, and it's part of a goal. But you have, in order to like recognize how that's done and how you can go about, you know, relating to it and stuff, you have to start breaking things not into infinity, but into finite structures. You can't even have infinity without finite structures. That's why I don't like calling God the infinite. He's infinite oneness. But that's not the same as just infinite. Like, infinite is requiring of the infinite replicative multiplicity. It's just, there is an order to these things, and it does really matter. But the language is so hard, and this was basically their entire conversation was like, how do we talk about this? Because the language, you know, reduces everything. But the thing is that there is a way of discussing this. I'm still figuring out exactly how you have to do that, but it's not about just choosing the right words. It's about focus in certain moments on certain things, while remembering, you know, the other side of the truth. But always taking both into account, like heads and tails. You can't just be like, God is infinite. You can't even be like, God is one. Really. You can, though, a bit, because he doesn't need us to exist. And it's our existence and replication that causes the infiniteness. But that is the thing, is that's what I'm saying, is like there is an order. That's why you can say God, he has oneness. That means he's finite. It is his finiteness that then allows for us to understand our finiteness, and it is the combination between our collective finiteness and replicating finiteness that allows for us to understand his infiniteness. You have to go in order. You can't start at infinity. You have to start at one. And he says all is one and all is God, but it's just about where you focus in certain moments. I would be fascinated to have a conversation with Leo one day. I think that him and I would have a conversation that I don't know if anybody else could have with him, that I've ever, and nobody else I've ever seen. Certainly some other people exist. We're not like the only two in the world that have achieved this level of like awareness of what is true of existence. But I guarantee you there's others. But I will say this also, is that, you know, he claims that this all came from, you know, psychedelic experiences. I'm not the biggest fan of psychedelics. And I've done them. I've done mushrooms. I've done LSD once. I've done mushrooms a couple times. And I've never done DMT. I always wanted to, because I recognized that everybody was talking about the same thing, but I couldn't understand what they were talking about. So I was like, okay, I want to know. And then I had that experience in the shower, and it was like a DMT experience, but it was clean. I knew what was going on, and it was informing of my life perfectly. There were no questions of like, what the heck were those machine elves looking things? There was no machine elves. I've never seen machine elves. Like, I'm not saying they don't exist or whatever they are. Angels and demons do exist, I believe, but and even other types of entities. I mean, I know demons exist. I don't think demons exist. I know they exist. I've seen one. Never seen an angel that I've recognized, at least. But I've seen a demon. I didn't even realize it was a demon. I thought I was a hallucination because I was like experiencing sleep paralysis. And then I saw pictures of other people had drawn of Wendigos, and it was exactly the same. So I know what it was and what it did. Like, here's the thing. When you wake up from a dream, it takes all of about like a minute at most to realize that whatever happened, you know, whatever was going on in your mind just before you woke up is not actually happening around you. It was only happening in your own mind, but it was independent of the minds of, you know, the other sentiences that you have to interact with directly. And but if there are certain times where you just know it's not a dream. Like, you know it's not a dream. If you know what is a dream, then you know what's not a dream. Then people will question you and they'll be like, oh, it was a hallucination. It was all in your mind. There's nothing but mind. But that's not the point. There are, and this is the same thing as like when Leo's talking about, okay, what is that which is imagined? Okay. What God imagines is it's two-sided. Everything must be made in God's mind by God, because there's nothing outside of God's mind. So God can think about and have it be internally just with him, okay, because he is still sovereign, about an idea and be like, I'm all there is. So, and I'm a conscious, sentient, self-aware being. That means that that's all that exists. And so I want to make more because I feel meaningless. And I think he felt meaningless. That's not a question. It's not a statement that is an assumption of. It's not even an assumption. It is just a fact. He was meaningless. And he felt meaningless because he was sentient, meaning he feels. Everything is about the self when it comes to feelings. He felt. And then he chose to create. Like, this can be known. Like, this stuff can be known. Like Leo says, he's like, you can know this stuff. And at this point, he's like, I could literally give you all the answers. And I looked at that and I was like, there is such a remarkable amount of truth in that statement. But, and I'm not saying that he doesn't have them. I don't think that we have to figure out what's the right way of speaking about it. And we have to realize that there's always two sides to every coin, and you have to know that both sides of the coin exist in every single instance. And it to present only half the story will lead to misunderstanding. And so this is why, like, I don't think that, Leo does misunderstand. I just don't agree with how he says things. But that's because he's aware of the superposition of all of this. Like, he was talking about meaning, and I'll show it to you in a minute, and he's like, the goal is for you to figure out that you're God. And that is part of a personal journey of self-discovery, yes. But it's, and also discovery of, but it's really that which you discover is not that you are God. And that is what is so profound. It is that in your discovery of God and his oneness with you, you discover self. Okay? Like, it's a simultaneous discovery of self and God. This is freaking hard, man. This is the hardest discussions to ever have, and it's not even that the ideas are complicated. They're so simple. They're so simple that, like they were discussing, they were like, to reduce, to put something into words is to reduce it, and that's true, and that's part of the problem sometimes. But a lot of times, part of the problem is that to put something into words is to make it more complicated than it actually is, and that it is supremely simple. And but to put a word on it is to pick a focus point of the structure, when in reality it's like two sides of one coin. You need to see both. This requires us to figure out ways of laying out these discussions where you understand that there is an order to which side matters, depending on what you're applying, what your goal is with the information. You understand that there are two truths that appear to be mutually exclusive but are actually dependent. And then you can stop having stupid, arguments about whether or not the universe is deterministic, or if you have free will, or if God has free will, or whatever. Like, what is free will? There's just will. It's not free will. There's will. Free will isn't a good word. It's that, at least in today's times, it's not understood. It's the superposition between choice and desire. But even more than that, it's the superposition between your desire, God's desire, and the choice to, and your ability to choose between the two. That's what free will is. It's this binary triality that occurs. It's the same pattern. But to just call it free will, there's not enough there. You need to use the pattern that is the theory of everything pattern, the theory of EveryOne pattern, the pattern that mind is and that mind, perceives, to to frame any discussions about God, consciousness, matter, information, like anything that exists in all instances of observation. You need any discussion and understanding of it to follow the pattern that it is. Okay? So you say it's not that this is it's a materialist universe, or it's an idealist, universe, or that it's a mind, or that it is, just an algorithm. It's like, it's all of these things, but which one, like, how do we arrange them? This is like when I'm like looking at constructor theory and emergence theory and geometric unity and my big toe and all of these things, and I'm just like, these aren't all true. But for the most part, there's flaws in everybody's work, obviously, but for the most part, all true. What is the objective, most primary way of describing the nature of reality? You have to start there, and you have to label it that, and it is sentience. Existence is a singularity of sentience, creating sentient singularities within itself. That is being done according to an objective pattern that is emergent and appears to have no freedom in how it is constructed, but has degrees of freedom within it that allow for sentiences to make choices. And it is this ability to make choices that is the distinction between us and God. It's, can you make a choice independent of God? If you can't, you are not independent. And, or not, I don't want to say independent. He's independent of us. We are dependent on him. But he's sovereign from us, which means we are distinctive from him. And it is, you do say him because even though there is no gender to God, really, it's that gender is about relationships, and anything above you in a hierarchy is he, anything below you in a hierarchy is she. So even though I'm male, I am feminine to God. I am the bride of God, not the husband to God. It's not husband and husband between me and God. I'm the wife. If you're male, you're the wife. It doesn't matter of God. It doesn't matter if you are male. If you're a woman, then you are the wife of man. And then he is the wife of God. So God is the husband of me, and I'm the husband of my wife. And that is like how it kind of lays out. So when people say gender is a social construct, yes, it is. Actually, yes, it is. But see, the problem is that without context, that doesn't mean anything. And then it ends up being that gender means nothing. And if you do this with God, you don't give God context. And you don't give you context, and you just say, we're all one. There's no context. There's no hierarchy. Then you end up saying there's no objective good. There is no responsibilities. There is no meaning. Like it all just disappears. And that is to just like ignore what God has done. Like, you can't do that without ignoring all that God has done. You can be aware. It's like God is aware that he is all there is, which means that he is aware that anything that would be outside him would not be non-existent, really. But, like, he knows that it's not even really worth focusing on because it doesn't really exist to him. But it's it's a piece of information. Just to know there's nothing outside of you. Even though that's not really the way that he would think about it. He would think about it as, I'm all there is, not there's nothing outside of me. Okay? And so you would say that those are two things that are exactly the same. No. One comes first, which is there's nothing out. I am all there is comes first. Then you can say there's nothing outside of me. But you can't say there's nothing outside of me without first saying I'm all there is. Negatives can emerge from positives. Positives do not emerge from negatives. Nothing emerges from negatives. So this is why it's so important to talk about things about God in order. And I think that order was totally violated in this discussion, even though I agree with what was said. And I do think that, Leo is not lying. I mean, it's obvious to me that he's not lying. You would know. You can know. I know who's met God and who hasn't met God if they talk about it. Or that I know who knows God exists. I don't know what his personal experiences are with God, but I do know that he knows God exists. He does. And he does know the things that he says that he knows. He knows them. He doesn't think them, believe them. He knows them because he's experienced them. This is why I say I'm aware of God. I don't believe in God. There was a point in my life where I believed in God. It was right before I was sucked out of my body. It's not that belief doesn't exist. It's not that faith doesn't exist. It's that some people do have belief and have faith. I had belief and I had probably just come to faith right before I became aware. You can't become aware, though, of God without him wanting you to. Like, you aren't, it's like getting into the White House. They have to open the door for you. Okay, the president is in there, that's his house, you don't get in unless you're on the list. This is what it's like with God. And but if you're going to deny that the president exists, he's probably not going to let you in, at least, till he humbles you through lots of, challenges. They also discussed, like, Sam Harris. I discuss Sam Harris sometimes too. Sam Harris, I understand why people discuss Sam Harris, because he is frustrating. But, like Sam Harris and his beliefs of God and atheism, they're just, and you can't be an atheist. Like I've said before, you can't. You're trying to start with an anti, which means that which you can't. Which means that you're actually going to de facto start by defining yourself as that which you are trying to avoid. So, again, order matters. But see, the thing is that when there is no order to a discussion that's about God, like what had happened with this one with Leo, I can't even talk about it with any order. Like, it's just like coming out without any, hierarchy. Like, I've been jumping in this worse than I've jumped in any stream ever. I've been having the hardest time keeping on topic in this stream than I've ever had. And I think it is because I am trying to make a stream based on a stream that is disordered. And it's disordered about something that you must, talk about within a specific order, because it's an objective thing that exists everywhere, but that can only be understood in context. Versus like something that exists only in a specific instance, which it has intrinsic context, like a water bottle. What is a water bottle? It's a water bottle. What is the context of it? It's a bottle that holds water. Like, it's intrinsic. But if I'm like, God exists, existence exists, and consciousness exists, it's like, okay, yeah, sure, everywhere. So how do we talk about it? It's challenging. But you have to start from affirmatives. My next stream will do that. And I predict that anybody who watches that one on Tuesday, compared to this one, will see what I mean by, like, what happens when you break things into finite, beliefs that you start from and you build logically, versus, this like chaos that emerges from trying to start from oneness. It's like, why are the people that focus on we're all one so selfish? Curt said this, and he said that the people that he was saying that the democratic side of politics right now is intrinsically the selfish, basically, like, side of politics right now. It's like and there was selfish people on all sides. That's not the point, but like, they are much more what they think the other side is than the other side actually is. And that's just right now. It's not always the case. In the past, it was flipped. And it just flip-flops back and forth. And it's flipping right now. The conservatives are becoming the liberals, and the liberals have become the conservatives. You have liberals like, we need affirmative consent, and which is like marriage almost. Like, that's the ultimate affirmative consent. And then you have, like, conservatives that are like, that's not even cool, bro. It's like, where did we flip? But they were discussing, like, Curt said that the left right now is incredibly just hateful. And if you listen to their rhetoric, though, it's all about oneness. It's all about oneness. Because if it's all about oneness, then it's not about what can I do for you. Because who am I and who are you? We're all one, right? So, like, this is the problem. You build a society from the ground up where this is me, this is my wife, this is my family. This family is my family, and that family is his family over there, and that family over there is his family over there. And all of a sudden, these families come together and we, create specialization in castes and then a nation. You can do that. You can't be like, we're all one, guys. And, there's nothing to do from there. Like, there's no order. There's no responsibilities. There's no building according to the patterns that are the patterns of existence. You need to start from what you know to be absolutely true, which is that you exist, and build from there. You have to start from you. You can't start from God. You get to God, but you don't start from God. Okay, I'm going to stop speaking for a minute. Because, like, it was just going everywhere. Gosh, that was so frustrating, though. I've never been so frustrated by just trying to have a conversation. Not a conversation, but trying to discuss something on here, or say something on here. That was the most frustrated I've ever been trying to say something. And there's multiple reasons why that is, and I know what that is, but if I try and outline them more, I'm gonna have problems with it. Self-awareness, interesting. Polemy. Wow. What were you doing when you got some? Any questions? What time is it? It's like 9. Let's just go through some clips then. And try and just do this. Recognize that it was like within the first 10 minutes I realized that, like, for this stream to have coherence was out the window. like, that's fine. You can't focus on it once it happens. Okay, so let's look. Clips. I'm just going to go through each clip and just be like, this is true, this is not true, this is true, but we should focus on this. And I was trying to do it in some order, and I couldn't because there was no order to how this was done. It was just starting from the top, and you can't start from the top. Okay? Only God starts from the top. And to start from I'm God and you're God and we're all God. No. That's not the right way to build. God can build like that. God says, I am me, though. He says, I am. God asks those same questions as us, and the answer to that sequence of questions that I said earlier of what is the first question, what is the first question, and what is the truest, that I know, and then I am. That God goes through that exact same line of questions. And so do we. You don't go, what is the first question? What is the first question? What is the truest that I know? God is. Because you don't. You can't. Even God doesn't say that. God says, I am. There was a statement that said, consciousness has no opposite. That's true. God has no identity. Not true. What is love? Love is the gravity of consciousness. I don't really agree with let's go into love, because I don't really like the way that Leo talks about love at all. I think it's useless. Even though I think it's true, it's just useless. That is the problem. There's no point in having useless conversations, because if it's useless conversation, what happens is that because we're in entropy, we're in relativity.
Love is a very profound concept. Most people think of love as some hippie.
What happens is that basically you just
idea or a human.
Gosh, you just aren't able to. It becomes counterproductive. You can't. It's like if you're not growing, you're dying in relativity. That's what I'm trying to say. If you're not growing, you're dying in relativity. In objectivity, outside of relativity, there's only growth. There isn't death. There isn't decay. But the thing is that within, but there also is staticness outside of relativity. There's growth. There's staticness, but in relativity, there's growth and death, and there isn't actually staticness. And if you try and be static, you'll die. This is why it's important to say things that are useful. And if they're not useful, then you are wasting time. And not only are you wasting time, which isn't intrinsically like it's counterproductive anyways, because you're not getting that back. If you say something out of context, it will be misinterpreted. Okay? That is bad. Because it leads to misunderstanding. It can't be just not understood. It's misunderstood. There's no such thing as not understood. If it's about God. If it's about something that exists everywhere, if it's about consciousness, it's the same as there's no atheists or agnostics. There's just anti-theists and theists. There's only understanding and misunderstanding. There isn't about the intrinsic nature of reality. There isn't not understood. Because you engage with it all the time, which means you have to make assumptions. There's no way to not make an assumption. Every time you take a step, you make an assumption.
Feeling. See, again, love is one of those concepts that we bring a lot of metaphysical baggage into. For example, when we say love, we assume, here's what the materialist assumes, is that love is an emotion that is created by neurons in the brain, that is a property of higher order mammals and living beings. And there would even be doubt in this model. There would even be doubt whether like a cricket has love. Do you think a cricket has love? Can experience love?
I don't know. I would imagine it's an extremely low form of love if it does.
Right. And then would a rock experience love? You would say no.
I'd imagine it's like 1% of a percentage of a
right.
percentage.
I mean, and that would already require you to to be in the woo woo territory, because if you tell a serious scientist that a rock experiences love, they'll kick you out of their university.
You know, it's so strange because Leo, these ideas that you and I are talking about, they seem to be gaining more and more acceptance in a strange
That
manner.
is that is true.
At least with
Okay, so this is the point. Everything that was said, a lot of things that were said here were wrong. Leo is insinuating that a rock experiences love. It doesn't. Molecules do, which means that certain crystal minerals do, to some degree, if they're, but a rock is not a sentient being. It doesn't experience love. It doesn't love itself, like in and of itself. A cricket does love. It does love. It loves other crickets, and it loves itself every time that it, I don't know, eats, and then it loves God every time it reproduces, and like it is engaged in love. Love is the gravity of consciousness. Crickets come together and breed. I used to breed crickets for my geckos. Like, they absolutely love. They love as much as you love. They do. They can't, like, any sentient being experiences emotion. And and it experiences the emotions for the same exact reasons. Now, the perception that you can have can vary in a little bit in depth, I guess, of how many levels do you have of reasons for your emotions. But cricket has all the same emotions as you, and this love is one of those things too that it's everywhere. So you have to define it properly and realize it's a superposition. You can feel loved and you can love. It is an action. It is not a feeling, unless it is being done to you, because you are feeling an action being done to you, which you can feel loved, but it's not a feeling into itself. Like, that is not the feeling, of love. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's a superposition. It is fundamentally, first and foremost, though, an action, because there is no ability to even feel loved without someone taking an action of loving you, by doing good for you. Okay? And that's what the definition is of love. But this is the same exact thing that I'm talking about that I'm going to have to really nail down. And in the stream on Tuesday, I'm actually going to hide this stream because, like I said, and it's not out of my own ego, at all. Even though this has been just, I feel like this is a disaster. It is, like I said, that information out of context is destructive. It's misunderstood. And I don't want that to happen with this. So, I might allow it to be seen again after the next one goes up, but then people who watch this after they watch the next one won't be like, why is this guy making no sense? And think that, make assumptions that are incorrect about what I'm trying to say, or why I can't say what I'm saying, or why, I am saying certain things. Like, it won't be misunderstood. But if you start with this, you won't get anywhere. So, but this is what I mean by, this is where I really would disagree with Leo, though, and this is a problem, and it probably is coming from his focus on oneness might be hampering his ability to make sense of the world, where he's like, a rock experiences love, or, loves, and it's the same as a cricket. This is nonsense. And This is what I mean. You have to start with love as an action. But he gets there. But it's the second thing that he says, just like I said before, with everything. Everything that I would say needs to be said first, he says second. And that's not useful to making sense of your world.
Integrated information theory of.
Well, because we're talking about it, that's why.
That's almost like panpsychism. So in some sense, every single part of the universe is conscious. It's just at different degrees.
I think
scientifically.
I think what Curt just said there, integrated information theory, is Sarah Walker's theory that I talked about yesterday on the stream. That was a great stream, and made a lot of sense. And but that's because we were starting from, and building just based on, from the bottom up. We weren't starting from oneness here and then just like spiraling out of control. And that is true, that theory, by the way. I mean, like all the rest of them. But it's not... Information is not the fundamental nature of reality. And that's why integrated information theory is true, but it isn't the truth. Whereas sentient singularity theory is the truth. It's not true. It's the truth. It's explaining of the fundamental nature of reality, not a property that emerges from its fundamental nature, but its fundamental nature.
Accepted theory of consciousness. So it's so strange that much of what you and I say to the traditionally skeptical, debunking, materialist mindset, it seems like all of it is so false that it's ridiculous we're even talking about it. But that's not true from a scientific perspective. I just want to put that.
Science is always evolving, so of course the ideas we're talking about, if they are true, if what we're doing here actually has any kind of validity or merit, we should expect that science every decade will become more open to these ideas because they're inevitably true.
Oh, yeah. Let's get to these two levels of love.
Right. Well,
I will say this. Leo has identified this pattern that is true, that is that there's two layers to things always. So it's like you can feel loved and you can love. And there's two sides of every coin, and he does realize this, and it's apparent in how he describes them. What he hasn't realized yet is, where do you start? Now, God starts from God, but you're not. You're not God. Like, really. Like, you are, but you aren't. Okay? It's the superposition, and you have to start from somewhere. And if you start from, I'm God, you've destroyed hierarchy, which means you've destroyed your ability to actually maneuver the world in a way that makes sense and that is in alignment with actual constraints and degrees of freedom that you will encounter. If you start from I am, and then you get to God is, then you understand your place in God. And if you start from I'm God, you don't understand your place in God. That's the problem. I think I'm going to leave it at that, honestly, actually. It's a bit later than I wanted to go, and I'm just going to answer any final questions, and then I'm going to end it, because this stream was the perfect example of what happens when you're trying to not do things in the proper order when it comes to defining and explaining and discussing God or consciousness. Is it just jumps everywhere. And because I was defining this stream by another stream, it ruined the coherence of the stream. Like, it literally did. It was the perfect example to anybody watching. This was, and it's a perfect example to me, it's a reminder to me of the truth of what I'm saying right now, is that you have to start from what you know. Not what you don't believe, but what you know. And then you move to what you believe, and then what you don't believe emerges from that which you know and what you believe. So this stream was defined by another stream. Not good, basically, essentially, especially if, you're you are intrinsically contrasting. Otherwise, I'd just get on here and in 5 minutes I'd just be like, yeah, we agree on everything. It's exactly the same. But that would make sense. But if you're like, no, we don't, but this is why, and it's going to unravel. So the next stream, I'm going to follow the pattern that I know is the pattern of sense making, and it's going to be about the topics in this stream. We're going to use this stream with Leo and Curt to reference in order to talk about the topics that we're going to talk about, but we're not going to talk about the stream, because there is something about this stream with Leo, because he is telling the truth, that he actually did tap into God, then on a level that's just not common, that when you try and basically define yourself as like opposing of this, you get this stream, guys. Crazy. I've never had a stream like this ever. I look forward to the week when I'm able to go through timeless theory so we can chat on theory. I really look forward to that too, Curt. This was so hard. Oh my gosh. I do look forward to that day. But I'm going to have to think about like what we're going to have to talk about, and like, or how we're going to talk about it, because I don't think that this was helpful, even though I think that it was true what Leo did, and then my stream was even less helpful. So disregard, and I mean, don't even disregard, just like take it as a lesson, I guess. And then I'm going to make this stream visible next week, but after I want to hide it after I close it out until the next one, and that will give this one an order. So, all right, guys. If I keep going, it's going to continue to make less and less sense. Emotion and feeling. Emotion is a feeling. It's the highest feeling. It's the entanglement. It's when all other feelings come together and are entangled and made sense of around the self. That's when you get an emotion. Does material not live in a conscious field? So a rock may not love like you love your wife, but the field consciousness loves the rock. No. It's that the field... The rock is a perspective. It's a perceived structure that is built of entanglement relationships between sentient beings. And those sentient beings exist in a field of love. But the rock doesn't. It exists in your perception based on your position in the universe and the entanglement structures between the sentient beings that make up the rock. I was writing something you made me think of. A dream. Good. I'm glad I made you think in this. I had a very hard time doing that here. All right, guys. Peace. And next Tuesday, we're going to go over all of the concepts that are discussed in Curt's discussion with Leo, but we are not going to base it on that discussion, because it's clear it was a different kind of discussion, and I know what caused the problem, and even I made a mistake in not anticipating it. But it's obvious now that I should have anticipated it. I've never ever seen anybody like Leo. I've never gone through a conversation that was of, that was all about those ideas. It wasn't about theory. That's the difference. It wasn't the CTMU, this model. It was what he knows is true. And it is true. It's absolutely true. He does know what he says he knows. Peace.